Some events leave a deep mark on history, but none on the land. This is the site of the Battle of Hastings. After almost 1,000 years, no traces of the bloody conflict can be seen. But here, the fate of England turned. It's where a king was killed, and his victor claimed the throne. October 14th, 1066. We know what happened here on this day, thanks to this. The Bayeux Tapestry. A carefully preserved, illustrated record of events. It shows the main players. Harold, the newly crowned Anglo-Saxon King of England, and his challenger, William, Duke of Normandy. William claimed the previous king had promised him the crown. So, he assembled an army and prepared to sail to England to fight King Harold for the throne. But a storm thwarted his plans. Meanwhile, Harold discovered that a Viking invasion had landed in the north. Another threat to his crown. So he raced to fight them. In France, William waited for the right conditions to sail across the Channel to England. The weather cleared. He seized his chance. "250 miles north, Harold had defeated the Vikings. Now, hearing of William's arrival, his army sped south. At 9 o'clock in the morning, on this hill, William's Norman army were ready to do battle with Harold's Anglo-Saxon men. The stage was set, and up for grabs, England itself. On October 14th, 1066, William of Normandy stood ready for battle at the base of a hill. The high ground belonged to King Harold of England and his Anglo-Saxon army. Here, on this hilltop, the fate of England would be decided. William's Norman army made the first charge, launching a direct assault on the shield wall. Though William's army fought fiercely against the shield wall, it would not yield. As one man fell, another took his place. Overlapping shields in tight formation made for a near impenetrable barrier. Realizing his army could not break the shield wall, William called for a retreat. William's feigned retreat was working. The Anglo-Saxon army broke their shield wall formation, leaving gaps for William to make a move. With Harold's men no longer in shield wall formation, William could pick them off as they charged. The Anglo-Saxons had deployed rows of spearmen to push back the invaders, but William had an answer. his sharp-eyed archers. More Norman men-at-arms reinforced William's army. Anglo-Saxon archers joined the fray, and the Normans' deadly cavalry ready to charge. But first, William's forces had to eliminate the enemy spearmen, whose sturdy polearms could easily bring down a horse. Additional Norman archers joined the battle. With the threat of spearmen cleared from the field, William's cavalry was free to charge at the Anglo-Saxon archers. The Anglo-Saxon army was in disarray. Their shield wall had been neutralized and their numbers were dwindling. Now the only thing standing between William and victory was King Harold himself. The last of Harold's men encircled their king, prepared to lay down their lives to save his. Anglo-Saxon King Harold had fallen. In the confusion, some loyal soldiers fought to the death, while others scattered in panic. Leaderless and defeated, the last of the Anglo-Saxon army fled for their lives. The Normans celebrated victory over the English king, but William's quest to rule England was just beginning. At Guédelon in France, to understand how castles were constructed, they're building one from scratch, using just the tools and materials of the medieval age. It's a 25-year project, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. The most important defensive feature of any castle was the wall surrounding it.
Castle walls had to be incredibly thick in order to resist attack and absorb the impact of projectiles fired from trebuchets.
The curtain wall was over 20 feet deep, interspersed with towers. In earlier Norman castles, they were square. But while on crusade, European knights saw that eastern towers were round. They realized that eliminating corners not only made them stronger, but also provided a better view of the surrounding landscape. Completing the walls will take some 30,000 tons of sandstone.
Transport costs in the Middle Ages were incredibly expensive. So having a good supply of local stone close to the castle was vital.
To extract it from the quarry, first a row of holes is hand-drilled.
Once all the holes are ready, I'm ready to put in the iron wedges, and I'm ready to split it open by hitting very hard on each wedge with a big sledgehammer.
The stone is split into usable blocks, then transported using horsepower and human effort. This treadwheel crane can lift up to half a ton.
The walls are built like sandwiches. On the outside you have facing walls built from better quality stones, and the inside, the rubble cores, they're built with softer stones and other offcuts from the quarry. And they're built up in layers with a very thick, coarse mortar.
This ingenious method makes the walls better able to withstand hits from a trebuchet. Sandstone is too hard to be carved into intricate windows, vaults, and steps. Instead, softer, more expensive limestone is used. These sophisticated building techniques make castles the ultimate feats of medieval engineering. It's a testament to their construction that so many still stand today. At the Battle of Hastings, the death of one man changed the course of history. The Anglo-Saxon King Harold was killed here, on England's south coast. His army defeated by William of Normandy. Anglo-Saxon rule was over forever. At Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned the first Norman King of England. Now he had to secure power across the country. He began by stamping his mark on the landscape, building cathedrals and castles at strategic locations. Nothing like them had been seen in England before. They reminded the Anglo-Saxon population exactly who was in charge. But not all were content with living under Norman rule. Anglo-Saxon revolts broke out across the country. King William acted quickly to crush these rebellions. But there was one region where dissent was spiraling out of control. the north of England. In 1069, a group of lords from Northumbria formed an alliance with Viking invaders. Together they approached Norman-held York, a large city with an important cathedral, still protected by ancient Roman walls. But the walls couldn't save York. The city and the castle fell to the rebels. William's new kingdom was under threat. He had to get the city back under Norman control. William had no choice but to order his men north. But as the Norman forces set off on their long march towards York, how much resistance from the rebels would they encounter? William the Conqueror marched north, with his army of Normans determined to take back the rebel-held city of York. But in his path stood rebel towns that harboured William's northern enemies. He would take the towns back by force.
Accessments vos, compagnon. Apertisets vostre courage, compagnon. Avant, compagnon.
The Normans captured the town of Middlethorpe, establishing their presence in the north. With reinforcements to his armies soon arriving, William would need more resources to supply them.
Finit! Ubi va... Fake! Edifico. Escolto.
Je veux mon arway maigne avec moi. Ok, laburo.
Me? Laburo.
Escolto. Edifico. Labourance la terre. Masono. Baked.
The Norman army was now well supplied by a town, but it would take a sustained effort to keep the army at full strength. Another rebel town, Fulford, stood in defiance to William's rule.
Engage, compagnon!
Parate, ambulance. Bene, bene.
With the Fulford rebels eliminated, William was one step closer to York. Knowing he would face strong resistance in the city, William prepared to bolster his cavalry.
Parates, allons-y. Edifico. Colonel Spérant. What? Labour. Ubi vado?
The Norman army came under attack from a new enemy, the Danes. The northern rebels had forged an alliance with the Danish king Svein II, whose army would prove a thorn in William's side. William's army held back the Danes' attack, but they threatened to return unless William paid them in gold.
Parade pour venir.
William paid off the Danes and was rid of their attacks.
Parade pour venir.
William's ultimate goal was within his grasp. All that remained was to enter York and destroy its keep.
Bon labour.
Eccelimon demande.
With their stables in place, the Normans could add more cavalry to their army. William's reinforcements from the south had arrived, adding vital numbers to his Norman army. The Norman army poured into York and began sacking the town as they bore down on the keep. fell to the Norman army, and York was secured. The Northern Rebellion was over, and William the Conqueror was uncontested as King of England. One weapon more than any other dominated warfare in the Norman period: the crossbow. 14th century crossbows like this were the culmination of centuries of development. With limbs made of steel, they were incredibly powerful. But earlier Norman crossbows had limbs made of wood.
There was a limit to how powerful these wooden bows could be.
So the idea that Norman crossbows were a powerful weapon is really a myth. Despite this, they were effective at medium range, and that was enough in battle. Drawing the bow repeatedly took a lot of strength. Thankfully, help was at hand.
A crossbowman spanned his weapon with a device called a belt and claw.
This gave him extra leverage, allowing him to use his back and legs to draw the string.
Crossbowmen were vulnerable on a battlefield, so they carried large shields called pavises, so they could hunker down behind, load, pop up, shoot, and then duck back down again to reload.
Crossbows were accurate, took less training, and used cheaper ammunition than the longbow. Most importantly, you could wait to take your shot, so they were perfect for siege situations. To protect crossbowmen when they were defending castles, they used specially built wooden galleries, called hoardings. But shooting down towards an approaching enemy presented its own problems. How to stop the bolt from falling off the crossbow before it could be shot?
What they did is just place the thumb loosely on the top of the bolt, which is just enough with a light pressure to hold it in place.
Around 1200, the Norman wooden crossbow was superseded by a new design, the composite bow. With limbs made from horn and sinew, they could be made more compact than a wooden bow. And they could deliver up to 4 times the punch. They were, however, more expensive. So whether on the battlefield or the castle rampart, simple wooden crossbows remained the main weapon of the day. William the Conqueror had recaptured York from the rebels. Now he wanted to teach them a lesson for defying him. He began a brutal campaign of destruction to crush any further resistance, known as the Harrying of the North. Villages and crops were destroyed. It is said 100,000 people were killed. With ruthless efficiency, William the Conqueror had secured obedience in his new kingdom. But it wasn't to last. It would be thrown into chaos by his own children. When William the Conqueror died in 1087, his favourite son succeeded him, King William II, known as William Rufus. But 13 years into his reign, disaster struck. While out hunting, he was killed. William's youngest brother took his place as King Henry I. But there was a problem. At the time, Henry's elder brother, Robert, Duke of Normandy, had been on crusade. When he returned, he was furious that Henry had grabbed the throne. From Normandy, Robert attempted to invade England to claim the crown from his brother. But he failed and returned home. In retaliation, Henry struck back. In a reversal of 1066, he crossed the Channel and invaded Normandy, intent on undermining his brother Robert's rule. His first target was Bayeux. This rich and splendid city was one of the jewels of Normandy. Henry was to begin his campaign by unleashing his forces on the city. Bayeux was about to feel the wrath of the English army. In the brotherly feud over Normandy, King Henry I set out to make an example of Bayeux, a town still loyal to his brother Duke Robert. Henry's archers took up position on high ground outside the city and faced an immediate attack by Robert's cavalry patrol. Having deployed their palings, Henry's archers were well protected against the cavalry charge. They defeated the first patrol. As Henry set his sights on burning Bayeux, more reinforcements arrived to join his army. The English approached Bayeux and saw that its towering stone walls would not be breached by manpower alone. Henry would need siege equipment and a defensible location to construct it. Henry now called for the services of a blacksmith to bolster the siege effort.
Your way.
With a blacksmith on hand, Henry's infantry would soon be ready to construct siege equipment. Henry's infantry could now construct battering rams, siege weapons designed to break open fortress walls. With the power of battering rams, the English army could crack open Bayeux's mighty walls.
Potnicza! Strzelba!
Oui, sędzierły. Wygierę, wyjadę Sara.
Bayer's walls had failed, and Henry's men could now storm the city. Robert's garrison made a last stand to defend Bayeux, but Henry would show no mercy in cutting them down and burning their city. As Bayeux burned and the people fled in terror, King Henry basked in the victory over his brother Duke Robert. But Henry would not stop until all of Normandy was back under the English crown. By 1100, the medieval knight was dressed from head to toe in mail.
Mail is really like a metal fabric. It moves and behaves like a cloth, but is actually made of hundreds and thousands of interlocking iron rings.
It could turn and deflect a sword blade.
As an armor, mail didn't work all by itself. It needed the addition of a padded coat. The coat absorbed the shock of the blow, whilst the mail turned away the cut. Together, they formed an incredibly effective protection.
The first stage in making mail was to create wire to the right thickness. To do this, it was pulled through a drawing plate, which had a series of ever smaller holes, until you got wire of the desired gauge.
To make the rings, we wind the wire onto a mandrel.
And then we take it off the mandrel and cut the rings.
So I've flattened the overlapping ends of the ring and I've pierced a hole through it. And now Nick has to put a rivet in it. The basic construction of mail would be a ratio of 4:1. So each ring goes through 4 of its fellows. Here you can see I've made a set of 5, which will then be joined to other sets of 5 to create a sheet of mail.
Mail had to be tailored to a perfect fit. It had to be shaped for feet and legs, arms and hands, and, of course, the head. A skilled mail maker could make very precise shapes.
Of course, for more complicated parts of the body, like elbows, we can actually tailor it in 2 different directions at the same time.
Yeah, so if we fold this in half, we have an elbow.
One of the main benefits of tailoring in mail was that it meant a knight didn't have to carry a single ring of extra weight that he didn't need to.
The mail to cover a knight from head to toe required about 200,000 rings.
High-status knights would have had their mail edged with gold, but most importantly, it had to be functional.
Clad in mail with his shield and helmet, the knight was well equipped to face the weapons of the day. While Bayeux burned, King Henry pressed his advantage. Seizing key fortifications and buying the loyalty of powerful lords, Henry loosened his brother's grip over Normandy. At Tinchebray in 1106, brother would fight brother for final claim to their father's lands. Determined to claim Normandy and capture his brother, Duke Robert, King Henry besieged the castle at Tinchebray. But the direct assault on the formidable stone castle was failing. Unable to breach the towering walls, the king devised a new plan to capture his brother. Henry would force Robert to defend his lands from attack by razing the villages of Martigny and Fresnes.
Yeah?
To goad Robert out of his stronghold, Henry's men would burn the village to the ground. The village of Martigny was destroyed, but still Robert did not emerge to face Henry outside the castle. Henry would have to raise the stakes. Next, he targeted the village of Fresnes. Henry could buy reinforcements from nearby allies, if he could procure the gold to pay them. Henry paid his ally in Tosny and received a regiment of soldiers. Henry received word that Robert had sent for a fresh army to aid in defending his position at the castle. Henry had to eliminate these new forces before they could combine with the garrison at Tinchebray. By eliminating Robert's incoming army, Henry had thwarted his brother's attempt at strengthening the castle's defences.
We shall lay them. Yes, sir. Understood. Strabord, yeah, Paragonga. Strabord, yeah.
At the hands of Henry's army, the village of Fresnes was in ruins. Henry's provocations had paid off. Robert finally emerged from the castle to face his brother in open battle. King Henry's tactic of luring Robert into the open had worked. Henry captured his brother, and Normandy was his. William the Conqueror's sons had resolved their long feud over Normandy, with King Henry wresting possession away from his brother. But the French King Louis VI would not accept Henry's heir as the future Duke of Normandy. Henry's fragile power would face its first test, an invasion by the French king. In the disputed countryside between Normandy and France, a smouldering farmstead gave away the beginnings of a French invasion. At the head of the vast army stood King Louis of France himself. An English scout hastily rode to inform King Henry of England, who was still en route to defend his borders. Hearing of the threat, villagers and guards fled their English-held towns and retreated to the stronghold of Fleury. Above all, the English forces in Normandy had been commanded to hold the town of Fleury and await King Henry's arrival. As the village of Crescenville fell, all English hopes lay in holding Fleury for the king's arrival. The town of Granville succumbed to the French, and the English were pushed back towards Fleury. At last, King Henry and his forces made their arrival at Fleury. Knowing that King Louis himself was on the field, Henry saw his chance to put England's claim to Normandy beyond doubt. King Henry's men struck at the French forces and recaptured the town. Unwilling to let the English retake their Norman holdings, King Louis sent a counterattack to raise the recaptured town.
Vous êtes tout seul, Beodeth May. Look for your be ready.
With the border towns recaptured, King Henry's claim to Normandy faced only one more obstacle: King Louis and his army. In the humble peasants' fields of Bremule, two kings would settle their claim to Normandy. Far from home, but rallied by their king, the English army forced a French surrender and put King Louis and his knights to flight. With the impromptu battle ending in resounding victory for the English, King Henry had secured his ancestral lands under the English crown. Norman domination over England was marked by their imposing castles and new laws. But one passion of theirs also impacted the land: hunting. The Norman nobility, both men and women, shared a love of hunting with birds of prey. To preserve their hunting grounds, they took ownership of the land and outlawed hunting by commoners. Falcons hunt by flying to a great height, then dive-bombing their prey. They are kept hunting fit, using a lure, a pad of leather with bait attached. This prepared them for catching their prey, usually other birds such as rooks and pheasants. While out hunting, a falcon might give chase to its prey far from the party. So, riders would follow them cross-country on horseback to witness the action. After a falcon had caught its prey, it was fed and would not fly again that day. This meant many birds had to be taken on a hunt to keep the nobility entertained. Rather than falcons being carried on horseback, which would jostle them, they were transported on a frame called a cadge. Although falconry was a horseman's sport, hawking was enjoyed on foot. Hawks, unlike falcons, have broad wings and hunt by following their prey in straight flight, often low to the ground, through woodland. Hunting by sight, a falcon's vision is highly developed. When not hunting, they were kept calm by putting on a leather hood. the darkness stopped them becoming overstimulated and restless. Lords of the sky, controlled by the lords of the land. Falcons and hawks were symbols of power and status. They were central to Norman identity. After England defeated the French at the Battle of Bremule, Normandy was back in King Henry's hands. But 1 year later, his good fortune turned to tragedy. In 1120, his son and heir William Adelin died in a shipwreck. The future of Henry I's kingdom was in jeopardy. Henry desperately needed a new heir. With no legitimate sons left alive, he broke with tradition and chose his daughter, Matilda. Henry forced his barons to swear an oath to accept Matilda as queen. But when the king died, they broke their promise. England would not be ruled by a woman. Matilda's cousin Stephen saw his chance and claimed the throne. The crisis moved to the capital. At Westminster Abbey, Stephen was crowned king, but Matilda wanted what was hers. She was also lining up powerful supporters who would fight Stephen for her right to rule. Their conflict engulfed England in civil war. Fighting raged throughout the land. In 1141, everything focused on one of the kingdom's most strategic cities, Lincoln. Matilda's allies had commandeered the castle. But King Stephen was determined to take it back. He besieged the castle. Stalemate. As dawn broke on February the 2nd, everything was about to change. Matilda's half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, raced to break the siege. As Robert's forces approached Lincoln, Stephen's army turned away from the castle to face them. Robert could win Matilda the crown, but only if his army could win the day. Robert of Gloucester's forces approached Lincoln. Their task, to liberate the castle from King Stephen's siege. While behind Lincoln's walls, troops loyal to Matilda held the castle for the Empress. First, Robert's forces would stage an ambush to prevent enemy reinforcements from joining with King Stephen's army. Robert's men concealed themselves in a sheltered grove and lay in wait for the enemy.
Each sail to foe! Ich habe found the foe!
Ich tue so, du hättest.
Na, the foe excelente! Scout Reader Scout! Wieder Schulen Wigger, wie denn den zu Reader als Samen Scouts!
Robert defeated the first column of Stephen's reinforcements, but he knew more were on the way.
It's your very lightness.
Bandits! Isana nirbi!
It's Suahis Ariata.
Ich habe mich found in the foe!
It's obey thine hess.
With more of Stephen's reinforcements eliminated, Robert was steadily undermining the siege. Robert's men decimated King Stephen's reinforcements and were poised to break the siege. Continuing the push towards Lincoln, Robert sent in a large company of reinforcements to aid his vanguard. To further weaken the siege, Robert would need to cut off Stephen's supplies. He targeted the nearby market town.
Heriente hestes nu. Foliente hestes. E canadu. Heriente hestes nu. Foliente hestes. Step!
Rallying to Matilda's cause, a large group of knights arrived at Lincoln to bolster Robert's army. With the market town in ruins, King Stephen's supplies began to dwindle. Robert received word that Welsh troops under Matilda's banner were en route to join forces with him. But King Stephen had the roads to Lincoln heavily guarded, and the route was not without risk, even for the hardy Welshmen. Making their way to Lincoln, Matilda's Welsh allies were ambushed by the king's soldiers. Robert's men would need to aid the Welsh if they wanted their help in breaking the siege. joining forces on the road to Lincoln, Matilda's allied troops made for the castle to lift the siege.
Look how we served us. Forward every chance here. Ariende Hestes nu Tulkes. Andente to serve. Ich live to hear it. Ich shall lay the young.
Robert's forces spotted a large detachment of Stephen's soldiers guarding the castle gates. If they hoped to liberate Lincoln, they would need to break the blockade and rout the army. Robert's forces scattered the king's army, leaving the gates to the castle unguarded. Robert's men finally united with Lincoln's garrison. They could now use the castle to strengthen their army. To lift the siege, they needed to destroy the enemy camps surrounding the castle. Matilda's forces struck hard, destroying one of King Stephen's siege camps. King Stephen's army dwindled as Matilda's forces struck down another siege camp. army was scattered, and those who didn't fall fled. King Stephen was spotted, shielded by his men. To end the siege, Matilda's forces needed to capture Stephen and rout his army. Matilda's men closed in and finally captured King Stephen. Matilda's forces had won the battle at Lincoln. But the fight for the crown was not over yet. A counterweight trebuchet was the king of all siege engines. A catapult capable of smashing down castle walls from great distances. At Warwick Castle in England, they've built a replica, one of the largest in the world. Originating in 7th century China, by the 13th century, trebuchets had evolved into devastatingly powerful weapons.
Such a simple design, but so effective.
It has several key features. A pivoted arm with a weight at one end, and a sling to hold the projectile at the other. To prime, the 6-ton weight is raised using tread wheels.
So this is one of the wheels, one of two that's attached to an axle, which would lift the counterweight, weighing 6 tons. It's based on muscle power alone. What's essential about launching a projectile as far as possible is making sure that this end of the arm is moving as fast as possible. So once that weight drops, it really sends this point of the arm moving at its highest velocity.
This was done by positioning the pivot close to the counterweight and by launching the projectile from a sling. When released, the sling whips round, vastly increasing the launch speed. Trebuchets were carefully aimed, like modern guns.
In order to weaken the castle walls or even breach them, you had to make sure that the projectiles hit the same spot every single time.
For each projectile to follow the same trajectory, they all had to be the same weight and shape. To achieve this, masons used a gauge.
Now I'm going to load this projectile into the sling. Oh, this one must weigh about 25 kilograms, but some projectiles can get up to 150 kilograms. That's the weight of 2 men.
Trebuchets were also used to throw burning tar, beehives, even dead bodies. Anything to cause maximum distress to the enemy.
Did you hear that whoosh?
It was the counterweight trebuchet's lethal combination of power and accuracy that made it the ultimate medieval siege weapon. Victory over King Stephen at Lincoln gave Matilda the upper hand in her fight for the English crown. But in the years that followed, fragile loyalties shifted, and under threat of capture, Matilda was forced to retreat. As her holdings in England came under attack from the king's army, it fell to her son Henry to keep Matilda's claim to the throne alive. Inside the strong stone walls of the castle at Wallingford, Matilda's men held firm against a brutal siege by forces loyal to King Stephen. King Stephen's army had constructed a fortified perimeter outside the castle, trapping Matilda's men inside. However, reinforcements were on the way from Matilda's son Henry. Her forces needed to hold the walls until they arrived.
See things to work out. Hold for time. Be ready.
Matilda's forces received word that Henry's troops were getting closer to Wallingford. Soon the combined numbers of the two armies could tip the scales in their favour.
Townsfolk, are they ready?
At last, Henry's reinforcements approached Wallingford. United under Matilda's banner, the two armies were ready to engage Stephen's forces. Henry and Matilda's forces struck out at the besieging army, weakening the enemy's hold on Wallingford's perimeter.
Look at you being insurgents. We are covered.
Crossbows, yep. Yada. Forka crossbows.
The enemy line wavered as Matilda's forces cut down the besieging army, clearing another section of the blockade. Matilda's forces overwhelmed the enemy and cleared the castle's perimeter.
Yada unto a marker.
Breakers, and them new. Get to be ready for Heskins. Stress it, yo! We are scattered! Set it here. Hadita Yara Arman! Hospana!
She's there to work. On my way. What needed beyond duty?
Kai Hestis, Ridende Sua.
The joint forces of Matilda and Henry had thwarted King Stephen's siege of the strategic castle at Wallingford. After over a decade of conflict, Matilda's claim to the throne was still alive. At Wallingford, in the shadow of the castle, Matilda's faction, commanded by her son Henry, proved it was still willing to fight King Stephen for the crown. But after 15 years of conflict, both sides had had enough. So, they made a deal. Matilda would surrender her claim to the throne on condition that when Stephen died, her eldest living son Henry would succeed him. A year later, he was crowned King Henry II and proceeded to grow the kingdom into the mighty Angevin Empire. But, once again, what the king had spent his life building, his own children were destined to destroy. King Henry II had 4 surviving legitimate sons, and he planned to divide up his kingdom between them. But they fought bitterly for dominance. Against the odds, Henry's youngest son John became king. But King John was deeply unpopular. He lost huge swathes of the Angevin Empire gained by his father, then failed to reclaim them in expensive battles. Paid for by taxing his subjects. Eventually, England's barons could take it no more. They forced John to agree to a charter that restricted his power, the Magna Carta. But he went against his word. Furious, they rebelled, inviting Prince Louis of France to invade England. In 1216, Louis sailed to Dover and set his sights on taking this, Dover Castle. Held by forces loyal to King John, it was commanded by Hubert de Burgh. He described the castle as the key to England. He was right. If it fell to the French, so would the kingdom. Asked to invade by the rebel barons, Prince Louis's French army launched an assault on the castle at Dover. Opening a crack in the outer defences, the invading forces charged the castle walls. The garrison at Dover would meet the French with clenched fists and an iron will. Dover could not fall. Commander Hubert de Burgh rallied his men to hold back the French and defend the castle. While the castle's garrison thwarted the first French attack and prepared for a second, a new resistance force was building in the English countryside. A skilled bowman and fierce patriot, known as Willikin of the Weald, began to muster a resistance to the French invasion. Determined to keep the crown in King John's hands, Willikin would rally every available archer to the cause.
You're ready to done some work, eh? Hestes and on, Boermen. Dresset gärde Hestes nu. Kjäret Hasterias. Hestes kommer uppnärt bättre, Arwemen. Kjäret Hestes. Beos Lipoli on the stirreth.
With his bowmen assembled, Willikin planned to ambush the French siege engines on their way to the enemy camp.
Dresset gärde Arwemen. Hestes cometh, Arwemen. Hestes suet their head.
Willikin's band of archers made short work of the French reinforcements. But if they hoped to ease the burden on Dover's garrison, Willikin's ambush force could not relent.
Hestes cometh, Arwemen. And sweet the Getzer.
Willikin's resistance force continued to grow, adding more skilled men to its ranks.
It can do.
The French launched a renewed attack on the castle. But thanks to Willikin's ambush force, the enemy had been greatly weakened.
Kjære Hestes! Bere Tolkien! Waymen Sekande! On the steerer! Astyria! Rande Arwen! It's in Shetendeus!
With Willikin's archers weakening the siege from outside the castle, the garrison at Dover repelled the French attack. Willikin ordered his archers to resume their strikes on the French reinforcements.
Uppnärt färre, Arwemen.
Willikin spotted a group of English fighters engaged in battle with the enemy and rushed to their aid.
Step at two hit, Arwemen! Hestes and on, Boermen! Such smarter on flesh of wonder! He can do. Ted Dwindler, Barra. Al Suiza, yes.
Willikin's archers had decimated the French reinforcements. But undeterred, the French mustered what troops they could and launched another attack on the castle. The hardy English garrison held fast, refusing to let the castle fall to the French invaders. Willikin rallied his archers to continue strikes on the weakening French. The combined grit of the English garrison and Willikin's surprise attacks ensured that Dover hadn't fallen yet. Now the English prepared to repel the final French assault.
Sitte riden. Redende rocka stackaren. Sitte riden.
The tenacity of Hubert de Burgh's loyal soldiers forced Prince Louis and the rebel barons to abandon their siege at Dover. And thanks to the efforts of Willikin's fearless archers, England remained in King John's hands. Year prior to the defence of Dover, King John's defiance of the Magna Carta had mired England in a rebellion known as the First Barons' War. Across England, barons broke ties with the crown and seized important cities, including Rochester. With his reign under threat, John deployed his forces to retake Rochester and capture the traitors. King John's men arrived at the outskirts of Rochester, set to retake the castle and drive out the rebel barons within. But Rochester was a formidable fortress that protected the route to London, and the rebel barons were prepared to lay down their lives to hold it. Before King John's men could hope to retake the castle, they would need to reinforce their position by capturing the village of Chatham.
Kempes, lustet for hestes. Trulvet, gettet busy.
The king's men secured Chatham and began preparing for an arduous siege. Rochester's keep was protected by strong stone walls. The king's army would need mighty siege weapons to break through.
Every charn and tender. What needeth be undone?
Hearkeneth all. Who the worketh on a reader? Intended.
With the says, Unction. Harren. It will be undone. Doing that now.
What is
Bolton.
Truckers, your Hestes aren't here. Getting on knitted! The sail horses aren't here ready! Harriman, follow in the artillery!
Rochester's outer wall crumbled to King John's men, and they descended on the keep.
Arcanala, Hestes aren't coming. Our buildings are putting up. Well, have it. Ready?
Rochester's inner wall finally gave way, and the keep was laid bare for the taking.
On the spot! Where Nitas Army ready?
Villain, it is teams against Dinger's done.
Obeshing the Heste!
Villains, he ready and Reaper railings are not intended.
The great keep at Rochester fell at the hands of the King's army, securing both the castle and the route to London. While the fight for England raged on, a desperate King John clung to the throne. In the year prior to the defense of Dover,
people often imagine that castle walls were just left as bare stone, but in fact they weren't. They were plastered, painted, and decorated.
the process of making medieval paint begins in a quarry.
This is a sandstone with a really high iron content. In it, we find pockets of ochre. This is iron oxide, like rust, and the ochre is one of the main ingredients in pigment making.
First, the ochre is crushed into a fine powder.
The finer the particles in paint, the better the paint will be.
Once ground up, water is added. Then the mixture is sieved.
This is the exact opposite of making pasta at home. At home, when you sieve your pasta, you then keep it for your meal. Here, what's going to end up in the sieve we'll be discarding.
What's needed are the tiny particles suspended in the water.
Once it's dry, it's going to look something like this. You can see that all the water has evaporated, leaving just this very fine crust, which will then be ground into the fine pigment which is used to make paint.
But ochre's colour palette doesn't end there. If it's heated, something magical happens. Yellow ochre turns red. And heating it for even longer creates a whole spectrum of colours.
It's been burnt for over 72 hours at 1,000 degrees Celsius, and that gives us this incredible purple colour.
To turn the pigment into paint, it's bound together with egg and tree sap.
A popular motif in the Middle Ages was the use of stones and roses. That's where you paint on blocks of stone to make it look like you could afford to pay stonemasons to produce dress blocks of stone and then decorate them with 5-petaled flowers.
So, medieval castles were far from the gloomy places we imagine today. They were full of colour and light. When forces loyal to King John undermined Rochester Castle, it spelled doom for the rebels inside. Within days, they had surrendered. But the rebel barons weren't done yet. Their ally, Prince Louis of France, had sent an invasion force to help the barons overthrow King John. Then, in late 1216, the king fell ill with dysentery and died. His son, just 9 years old, was crowned King Henry III. It was now up to the young king's regent, the 70-year-old legendary knight William Marshal, to protect the crown. He faced a near impossible challenge. England was crumbling. Rebels were taking town after town. But William Marshal bided his time and prepared to defeat the rebels. Then in May 1217, he got the chance that he'd been waiting for. William discovered that the rebels planned to simultaneously besiege both Dover Castle and Lincoln Castle. With rebel forces split and weakened, William Marshal led his royalist army to Lincoln. The castle on one side of the city was still controlled by royalists, under its formidable constable, Lady Nicola de la Haye. But the streets of the city were under rebel control. On May 20th, 1217, the Royalist Relief Force, led by William Marshal, arrived to retake the rebel-controlled city. The future of England rode on the success of this mission. Troops loyal to the king held the castle at Lincoln, while outside, rebels controlled the city. The defenders had to hold the castle until reinforcements arrived, under the command of the king's knight, William Marshal.
Agretes for Hestes.
Every charge and tender. These are raiders are not going.
No, how do we go? Jonas Yaret, Marketh Yara, yes,
At last, the king's knight William Marshal arrived with his forces. While a hard battle remained, there was now hope for the young king's army. In order to liberate the city surrounding the castle, William Marshal commanded the king's men to destroy the military buildings belonging to the rebels. William Marshal's forces were welcomed in Stowe, a nearby town loyal to the king. The king's men tore through the rebel fortifications, diminishing the enemy's military presence. The castle now faced a new attack from the rebels' French allies.
Lord, your behest shall be done. Witnesses, are you ready for school?
If the king's men hoped to lift the French siege, they would need to destroy the enemy forts on the outskirts of Lincoln. The king's army razed the last of the rebels' military buildings, but the French siege continued.
Following the attack.
The king's men uncovered one of the French forces' siege camps near Lincoln.
Sneakers in good fettle no, for them. Now come and follow the stairs, engine, young wreckers. Horses is
The king's army tore through the French fort, weakening the enemy siege.
For the Shrewid, ready to
be
go.
ready for Hestes and glory. Gustav desires the shame. Gustav desires
Lernos, Freres, letting us forth steam.
Hearken, your honor. We have a test.
He shall go anywhere. If all way that is a building and they build it well, what need is blitzing? The Serge engines only ready. That will be all done. That's for the engine. Will it be all done? Assaulting. Nothing will be left. Rissing the foe. The mark is in Britain.
To Hestus, young men. Obeisance is me honor.
Mickle glory! Nu, young men.
Is that eater?
Rustanina de Rogers. Of the Shinkly Hexton!
Casting at their grottos!
William Marshal and Nicolas de la Haye had saved the city, and with it, the kingdom. William Marshal's success in retaking Lincoln was an overwhelming victory for the Royalists. The rebel barons had been defeated, and their French allies driven out of England altogether. William Marshal now focused on creating a stable kingdom for the young King Henry III. To maintain the backing of the rebels, in 1217, a royal seal of approval was given to a reissued Magna Carta, limiting the power of the monarchy. Many barons held lands in both England and Normandy. But now they faced a choice. On which side of the Channel would they make their home? Many chose England. The cross-Channel kingdom was over, establishing a clear English identity. But the impact of the Normans on England's evolution is still felt today. Almost 1,000 years later, the surviving Norman castles and cathedrals still dominate the landscape. In the midst of the modern city, William the Conqueror's fortress, the Tower of London, remains a powerful reminder of their legacy. But it's the unseen influence of the Normans that endures. The Norman invasion changed the English language and established the foundations of modern parliament and governance. And it's all because one man, William the Conqueror, claimed the English crown that he believed by rights was his. The Normans conquered a country and changed the course of England forever.